Hey everyone, I'm Armor Gaming, welcome back to my channel and welcome to part 2 of the What Monsters I Think Are Worth Buying video. Now if you haven't seen part 1 focuses on fire, nature, earth, thunder, and water monsters. Part 2 is only going to focus on dark, magic, light, and metal monsters. So if you're interested in those other elements that I mentioned, make sure you watch part 1. And again, I just want to remind everyone that if I don't mention a monster, it's not that that monster isn't good, and it's not really that that monster isn't worth buying, it's just that I'm talking about the monsters that really stand out the most to me. I'm really talking about the monsters that just stand out in their own class, and sometimes I'll throw in my opinion of other monsters that you might want to consider purchasing. And with that being said, let's jump into the dark category. Really quickly, I want to mention Fenrir. Fenrir is a fan favorite of many. He has really good stats all around, a high power, a high speed. His trait isn't the best, but that doesn't matter. And Fenrir is probably most popular for all of his skills having no cooldown, so he's a perfect choice to fight against Himerion. On top of that, he can also be a really supportive monster because of Rage of Fenrir. Target will deal 200% more damage, may stun target. So you can either use Fenrir as an attacker or you can use him as a supportive monster. Triple damage lasts for 3 turns. The only drawback is that you're going to stun the monster you give this buff to, but if you use Rage of Fenrir on a monster immune to stun, then that monster is going to have triple damage for 3 turns, and on top of that you can stack it with the double damage skill. So Fenrir can be extremely helpful for clearing dungeons, an adventure map, and for player versus player. And again, for wars involving Himerion, he's a really good choice. If this monster was on sale for 225 gems, he's certainly worth buying. Will Razorface is another monster in my opinion that's worth buying. Great power, also great speed, a really good trait, immune to possession. Many dark deny monsters have possession skills, so this will really come in handy. And Will Razorface, you can use him as an attacker. Just look at these skills: 60 damage, 2 turn cooldown, 3 turn cooldown, and this skill even has a 100% lifesteal effect, so whatever damage he deals out, he's going to recover in his life. If the cooldown is too high, take a look at this one: 50 damage, 1 turn cooldown, 50% lifesteal. But the cool thing about Will Razorface is that he also has this is pirate code. It's an AoE stun, so if you wanted to, you can give him all speed runes and use him as a main deny, or you can give him strength runes and he just has that added benefit of having an immobilizing skill. I should also mention that the only dark monster currently immune to stun is Harusami, so Will Razorface is another monster worth buying. But then that leads us into Harusami. Harusami has amazing stats all around. These aren't his real stats that you see right now. Whenever Social Point decides to finally remove his buff, his power is supposed to be 3,498, his life is supposed to be 30,763, and his speed is supposed to be 3,465. As for his trait, he is immune to stun, so many dark deny monsters have either a stun skill or a possession skill, so Harusami having immune to stun, this is really beneficial. And I would honestly probably compare Harusami the closest to Will Razorface because they're very similar. They can be attackers, or you can give them all speed runes and make them main deny monsters. So just check out Daku Shadow. It's a 100% lifesteal, 60 damage, except it only has a 1 turn cooldown and it only costs 25 stamina. Shao Sengiri is a 65 damage special base skill, 1 turn cooldown, 31 stamina, also gives bleeding. It's amazing. Majutsu Slashes is a 45 damage special based AoE. Going back to Will Razorface, his lifesteal has a 3 turn cooldown and his bleeding skill has a 2 turn cooldown and it's only 60 damage. And back to Harusami, we look at Majutsu Slices, it's an AoE stun. So these monsters are very similar. Harusami is a little better in terms of stats and skills, I would say, but the main difference really comes down to the traits. There's really no clear answer of which monster is better to have, whether it's better to be immune to stun or whether it's better to be immune to possession. It really depends on the kind of team wars you're in. For example, if it's a dark earth war, it's probably better to have Harusami because lots of earth monsters also have stun skills. But if it's a magic dark wars, then it would probably be better to have Will Razorface because he's immune to possession. Nonetheless, both of these monsters are really good choices. And now we move over to Mami, who is without a doubt probably a better dark deny monster than the other monsters I've mentioned so far. Her speed is great at 3,465. This is the speed that a lot of top tier deny monsters have, and she's also incredibly tanky with a life of 32,874. This is the second highest life for all the dark legendary monsters. So a really amazing speed, a really amazing life, and she also has a really amazing trait, immune to possession. As for her skills, Mami comes with an AoE stun, a 2 turn possession, look at that, it lasts for 2 full turns. So whatever monster you use this skill on, they're basically going to be on your team for 2 turns. And then we look at one more skill, go to your room, it's a 1 turn possession. So with Mami, any monster that's not immune to possession, you can basically have them on your team for 3 full turns. And if they're not immune to possession or stun, you can basically immobilize them for 4 turns. So Mami is really phenomenal. Mami is by far one dark monster you definitely want to get your hands on. With that being said, no one even comes close to Krampus. Krampus is without a doubt the best dark legendary deny monster, and this is primarily due to his amazing speed, 3,531. Currently in the game, Krampus is the fastest monster with an AoE deny skill. His trait isn't that great, gives immunity to nightmares, but that doesn't matter considering how fast he is. And Krampus's main form of deny is his AoE freeze skill, Freezing Shadows. Currently in the game, no dark monster is immune to freeze, so this is absolutely amazing. The enemy can have a Mami, a Will Razorface, a Harusami, it doesn't matter, they can all be frozen. On top of this, Krampus also has a single free skill, so he can deny the whole enemy team for 1 turn, and he can deny a single monster for 2 turns. And to sweeten things even more, take a look at Poison Gift. May poison enemy and applies 2 random negative effects to it. And then take a look at Burning Gift. May burn enemy and applies 2 random negative effects to target. So aside from Krampus being incredibly fast, from having an AoE free skill, a single free skill, Krampus has 2 skills that do an initial DOT and then apply 2 random negative effects to a single target. And when you look at all the different random negative effects, the enemy might get stunned, they could get blinded, they could be possessed, they could get frozen, they could get rebooted. There are so many good random negative effects and you're landing 2 of them. So this is why Krampus currently reigns supreme over all the Dark Deny monsters. And like I said with Voltic and Frostbite, Krampus is another monster you should definitely have on your team. Whether he costs 225 gems, 250, 276, whatever cost he is, you should definitely buy Krampus. And because Krampus is so darn powerful, it's only fair to mention Jabeline. This is a very unassuming monster who doesn't really pack much of a punch, but the reason she is worth mentioning is because of her speed, 3542. If you notice, her base speed is exactly 9 points higher than Krampus's base speed. And then when you look at Jabeline's skills, she has a 0 cooldown single stun skill. So for those of you that are more competitive players, you're gonna find that when it's a team wars involving dark monsters, the enemy will typically have a Krampus on defense with all speedruns, their best speedruns. So if you don't have a Krampus yourself, if you have Mommy, Will Racerface, Harusami, and you have the exact same level speedruns as your opponent, the enemy Krampus is gonna go first and potentially do AoE freeze on you. And if that Krampus lands his AoE freeze, you're pretty much done for. So this is why I think it's worth mentioning Jabeline. The fact that Jabeline has a faster base speed than Krampus. In fact, for dark monsters, Jabeline and Lostigos, they're the fastest dark legendary monsters. So it's only fair to mention to everyone, Jabeline basically serves the same purpose as Blob. Blob is faster than every other water monster. Given all speedruns, Blob can easily deny any water monster. Jabeline is in a similar position. Given all speedruns, Jabeline is faster than every other dark monster. And because Jabeline has a stun skill, Jabeline can pretty much immobilize every dark monster with the exception of Harusami. So Jabeline is definitely a monster you might want to consider picking up. And since I spent a great deal talking about Dark Deny monsters, there are 2 dark attackers that are really worth talking about, the first of which is Barbatos. Barbatos has a pretty good power and life, his speed not the most amazing, his trait also not the most amazing, but he really makes up for all of that in his skills. Master of Pain is a single target skill that deals 90 damage, has 100% accuracy, and it has no cooldown. The main drawback to this skill is that it drains 30% of your maximum life. Nonetheless, in a battle against a Timerion that does cooldowns activated, this is really beneficial to have, or really in any situation this is extremely beneficial to have. But the main reason Barbatos is so popular is because of Blood Covenant. Gains double damage, stamina regeneration, and 1 extra churn. This skill drains 20% of Barbatos' current life on the current and following churn. So this skill is amazing for many reasons. The first of which is obvious. Barbatos gives himself double damage and an immediate extra churn. When comboed with something like Master of Pain, instead of 90 damage, that becomes 180 damage. That can pretty much knock out anyone in a single hit, especially those tanky earth monsters. Another great thing about this skill is that because it gives you an extra churn, even if you get possessed by an enemy dark monster, it doesn't matter because you can just wipe off the possession using Blood Covenant. However, you do gotta be careful because this wouldn't work against Mommy's 2-turn possession, but against any other dark monster that has a single turn possession skill, Blood Covenant is extremely useful. And in fact, you can even combo Blood Covenant with Hellfire. Hellfire is a 35 damage special based AoE that also gives burning. So instead of looking at Hellfire like a 35 damage AoE, it's basically a 70 damage AoE and it's special based. So you don't have to worry about damage being reduced against a dark monster. Barbatos is truly amazing in all spectrums of the game. Player versus player, dungeons, adventure map, team wars, he is just extremely phenomenal. Like with Voltic, like with Frostbite, like with Krampus, whether this monster costs 225 gems or 276 gems, he is definitely worth buying. And besides Barbatos, there's only one other dark monster that truly stands out as an attacker, and that's Roso. In terms of power, Roso beats Barbatos, they have the exact same life, and Roso is a little slower than Barbatos. As for his trait, Roso is actually immune to possession, so this really does help against those monsters like Mommy and Lily that have those 2-turn possession skills. As for his skills, Roso has Soul Offering. This skill removes 50% of life from all of his allies, he gains an extra churn, and he gives himself triple damage. So unlike Barbatos that only gains double damage, this monster gains triple damage. The only drawback is your whole team is losing 50% of their current life. For something like player versus player, dungeons, and adventure map, there's really no consequence to this. You get a main deny monster, you deny the enemy team, you use this skill, the enemy is as good as gone. For something like team wars, you gotta be a little more careful with them. Roso also has his own AoE. It's an AoE dark based 30 damage skill that gives nightmares. The drawback to this is that it is dark based, so in something like team wars, fighting a dark monster, it won't deal as much damage as probably Barbatos' special based AoE would. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But one great thing about Soul Offering, because this gives triple damage to Roso, it can actually be stacked with a skill that gives him double damage. And whereas I would say Barbatos is a pure pure brute, Roso has some more control skills. We look at Ethereal Gash, deals heavy special damage, may possess target, requires cooldown, so he has the one turn possession skill himself. Cursed Blade deals moderate special damage, applies 2 random negative effects to target. So I really like Roso because he's both an attacker with control skills, and he's another monster I would say is definitely worth buying. Between Roso and Barbatos, I would have to say it's really up to you. It's hard to say who exactly is better because I think it's really situational. In terms of player versus player, dungeons, adventure map, either monster is good. Either monster can give themselves double damage, triple damage, and just wipe out the whole enemy team. That's not a problem. However, for something like Team Wars, it really becomes a lot more situational, and in fact most of the time you would probably want to use Krampus instead of Barbatos or Roso. And now we can move on into magic monsters, and we start things off with Galante. Galante is without a doubt the #1 monster you should buy in the whole entire game. I say this because Galante is always used in special breeding events, and whenever you want, you can use him to breed Lao Mu, who's one of the best nature monsters in the whole entire game, and you can also use him to breed Ledovec, who's one of the most amazing epics in the whole entire game. In terms of his fighting potential, he has a really amazing speed for magic monsters. He's way faster than most of them. His trait is immune to possession, which is extremely helpful considering how many magic monsters have possession skills. And for skills, you can honestly just take your pick. AoE Blind, Single Possession Nightmares, 100% damage reduction, AoE Stamina Leak, Single Possession Poison, 100% stamina drain from a single target. Galante, just like Blob, is in a very similar position in which he can pretty much deny any other magic monster. Without a doubt, a very phenomenal monster. He is a must-have monster. He is the #1 monster I think everyone should get their hands on first. However, I will say this monster is not worth spending 276 gems just because he is always on sale. Whenever Social Point does a special breeding event, they will always offer him for 250 gems. Sometimes they'll even put him in a combo and offer him for as little as 225 gems, so be on the lookout for that. And it would make sense that if Galante is a must-have monster, so is Violet. Very similar to Galante, Violet is also used in special breeding events, so it is extremely helpful to have her. As for her stats, they're pretty good all around. This isn't the best speed. There's plenty of magic monsters that have a speed of 3465 that could easily immobilize Violet if they're faster than her, so be on the lookout for that. Her trait is immune to possession, so that does help her out a bit. And as for her skills, she has an AoE possession plus damage reduction, another AoE possession that's only a 50% chance of possessing, and that's really all. So between her and Galante you should definitely get first, and Violet you probably want to get second. And just like with Galante, I would not buy Violet for 276 gems because whenever there's a special breeding event, you can pretty much be sure that Social Point will put her on sale for 250 gems, maybe even as low as 225 gems. So there's really no reason to ever buy any of these monsters for 276 gems. Now in terms of usability, I would say the must-have magic monster is probably Egg Eater. Stats wise, there's nothing really impressive about Egg Eater. In fact, his speed, this actually makes him pretty darn slow. There are plenty of magic deny monsters that are faster than Egg Eater and have an AoE possession or a single possession, but the thing that makes Egg Eater really stand out, so for one, his trait is immune to possession, which does help him out considering how slow he is, but Egg Eater really stands out because of this. Possessing Eggs, it's an AoE possession, and Multi-Effect Eggs, it's an AoE burn and blind. Egg Eater also has Snake Chomp, which although down here says 50% chance of stunning the target, it's actually been confirmed that stun is 100% chance of landing, so Egg Eater has a 0 cooldown stun, and he also has Dominating Eggs, which is a 50% chance of possessing all targets. So the reason I'd say it's probably most beneficial to buy Egg Eater is because this monster is good in offense and defense. When you put a monster in defense, you never know what the AI is going to do. They might do the worst skill they could possibly think of, but when you have an Egg Eater on defense, there's really no such thing as a bad skill. You have a single stun skill, a deny skill, you have a burn and blind AoE. If the AI is to do this first, that's extremely good. If he does Possessing Eggs and AoE possession, that's extremely good. Or at the very least, the AI would do a 50% AoE possession. So even though Egg Eater is nowhere near being the fastest magic monster, because of his skills, he is extremely good for all players. Whether you use Egg Eater on offense or defense, you have yourself an extremely solid monster. But for those of you that are more competitive players and invest in high level runes, I highly recommend buying Uru. At first glance, Uru appears to be an attacker, and honestly he can be. 3509, that is an extremely high power for magic monsters, but take a look at his speed, 3465. This is extremely fast. If you recall, I've mentioned this before, 3465, this is the speed that a lot of top tier deny monsters have. So in terms of magic monsters, he's faster than Singularis, Malare, Violet, General Shannara, Pixelion, Egg Eater. You get the point, right? Uru is extremely fast. And although he doesn't necessarily have a good trait for a magic monster, immune to daze, that's not going to help him out too much. The reason Uru can shine specifically for magic monsters is because of this skill, Multi-Stun Clone. He has an AoE stun skill. Now with the exception of Pixelion and Goldfield, no magic monster is immune to stun. So once again, this is for you more competitive players that have higher level runes. If you and your opponent have the exact same level runes and it's a team wars involving magic monsters, if you have Uru and they have Egg Eater on defense, if they have Violet on defense, it doesn't matter. Your Uru is going to go first, it's going to do AoE stun, immobilize the enemy magic monster, and then your attacker can do the rest. So Uru is another great monster worth buying. And before I go into light monsters, I feel the need to talk about Reptile, just because I know I'm gonna get so many questions on this monster. Stats wise, there's nothing really too impressive about Reptile. His trait is immune to freeze, which is pretty darn cool for a magic monster, but the main selling point of Reptile is his Glamorize skill. It gives triple damage to a single ally, and that triple damage lasts for one turn. Now for something like player versus player, adventure map, or dungeons, this is extremely helpful because you can easily wipe out the enemy team. For something like Team Wars though, I wouldn't say this helps you out too much. And because of that, because Reptile's main purpose is just to support one of your monsters so they can easily sweep the enemy team, it's really up to you whether or not you think this monster is worth it, because there are plenty of monsters that can probably sweep an enemy on their own. Look at the dark monsters, Barbatos and Roso. They have a self buff skill that also gives them an extra turn, so they really don't need a supportive monster like Reptile to boost them even more. So my personal opinion, although Reptile can help you out, I really don't think he's needed. I really don't think he's worth buying, but nonetheless he is a fan favorite, so feel free to buy him if you want to. And moving on to light monsters, the number one monster you should buy without a doubt is Demise. Demise is pretty much a supportive monster, an extremely good supportive monster that can arguably be categorized as a deny monster, who is also considered a game changer. The main important thing about Demise is her speed, 3,465. You've heard me say this multiple times before, this is an extremely good speed, because this is a speed that lots of deny monsters tend to have. But the reason Demise is considered a game changer is because of her strength from beyond skill. Gives one extra turn to ally, gives double damage to ally for one turn, requires cooldown. This is in my opinion the most broken skill in the game, because it gives you so many possibilities. The way this skill works in the game, as soon as Demise uses this skill on an ally, that ally gets an immediate churn right after Demise. So regardless of the churn order, regardless of when that monster was supposed to attack, that monster is going to get an immediate churn. So you're probably wondering, why is this so amazing? Well, because of this, you don't really need a deny monster on your team. You just need to run Demise with all speed runes, and you can run an attacker, you can run Barbatos, you can run Roso. All strength runes, give them your best strength runes. Their speed stat is going to be slow, right? They're going to have base speed stat, but because Demise can use strength from beyond, give them an immediate extra turn, give them double damage, then monsters like Roso or Barbatos, they're free to use their AoE skill. Or in the case of Roso, he can actually use his skill that gives him triple damage, then use his AoE skill, which will definitely wipe out the enemy team. Or heck, if you wanted to, you can even run a deny monster, and instead of giving them all speed runes like you typically do, you can run Krampus, give them all strength runes just for fun, use strength from beyond on Krampus. Krampus uses freezing shadows, still immobilizing the enemy team, but just dealing out damage just to be fun. Like, the number of things you can do with Demise and strength from beyond are just unbelievable. Now if that's not enough, like I said, she is also a supportive monster. The Light Within removes all negative effects from your team, also giving them a damage boost. By the way, the damage boost buff from Light Within can also stack with strength from beyond, and there's a few other buffs in the game that can also stack with strength from beyond. When Light Corrupts applies 2 random negative effects to a single target, she has a skill that can remove all positive status effects from the enemy team, extremely helpful if an enemy gives himself double damage or shields. And Draining Light gives your whole team life regeneration. Considering there aren't too many good light monsters, Demise really changed the game up. She is by far the best light monster, and regardless if this monster costs 276 gems, 225 gems, you have to get her on your team. Now, although Demise is the light monster that stands out the most, it is fair to mention 2 other light monsters, one of which is Incognita, who's an extremely good supportive monster. Pretty good stats all around. Her trait is immune to possession, so this is extremely helpful when going up against magic monsters and some dark monsters. And although I would categorize Incognita as a supportive monster, she can also be an attacker. This powered 3,432. For light monsters, that is actually the 3rd highest power stat. So looking at some of her supportive skills, Luck of the Draw is a skill that gives double damage and increased accuracy to your whole team, which there's really no other way to put it except that it's so darn amazing and so darn helpful. And there's really no other way to put it than this skill is probably the best supportive buff in the whole entire game. Double damage and increased precision. The way I like to use Incognita, I actually make her faster than my deny monster. That way my deny monster gets increased accuracy, and then there's no way my deny monster is gonna miss with its AoE. As you know, AoE skills have a 90% accuracy, so giving them increased accuracy, there's no way it misses. And then the double damage, that really complements Incognita, it complements the attacker, and it just gives my deny monster a little extra damage. Another supportive skill she has is Fate is Fair. It removes negative effects from your allies, and it also gives them energy regeneration. Transference is an AoE skill that removes positive effects from the enemy team, so if they have shields, double damage, any sort of buff, it's just completely gone. Divine Misfortune deals 50 damage to a single enemy, but it gives the whole enemy team 1 random negative effect. And Mystic Retrieval, an amazing AoE, 55 damage, and it gives Incognita life regeneration. So overall, Incognita, whether you want to make her supportive or an attacker or a hybrid, she's also extremely good, another monster you might want to consider buying. And now let's talk about Lath, who is without a doubt a pure light attacker. Currently in the game, Lath boasts the highest power for light legendary monsters. He also has an impressive tanky life, his speed is not the best, but again, for attackers that's not really needed. As for his trait, it's extremely good, hardened. All status effects have a 20% less accuracy against it. So although he may be slow, there is that slight chance that a negative status effect won't land. As for his skills, let's just take a really quick look at them. 60 damage, 1 turn cooldown, light base skill. 80 damage, 2 turn cooldown, light base skill. Also pretty nice that he has a 50 damage special base skill that gives bleeding, and he also has this really interesting skill that gives the Reaper countdown to a single enemy, so after 3 turns this enemy will automatically die. And a skill like this can be extremely helpful when going up against really tanky monsters, or maybe going up against light in nature monsters that have a lot of life recovery skills. Regardless, if you're in the market for a light attacker, look nowhere else but Lath. And there actually is another light attacker who I'll mention briefly, Lao Lao, who has a power of 3432, which if you recall is the exact same power as Incognita. One really amazing thing about this monster is that although she's an attacker, her speed is just phenomenal, 3553. She's actually the 4th fastest monster in the whole entire game. Out of the over 170 legendary monsters, she's the 4th fastest. So you normally don't see that. Normally when we talk about attackers, we say this monster has a really high power, but it's slow. But that doesn't matter because you pair them up with a deny monster. While Lao Lao doesn't really have that problem because she's incredibly fast. As for her trait, it's super attuned, regains 50 stamina points when affected by weak types. So considering she's a light monster, immune to blind would have been good, immune to daze would have also been good. Super attuned, this would definitely help you out going up against metal monsters, but it's really up to you whether it's a good trait or not. And she is without a doubt an attacker. Take a look at this, 40 damage light based AoE that has a 50% chance of dazing all targets, blinding wind, 35 damage light based AoE that blinds all targets. And as for her 2 really offensive skills, Don't Stop Kenzo deals massive light damage, 75 damage, 2 turn cooldown, it's light based and gives bleeding. Flashing Scrapes deals massive special damage, 75 damage, 2 turn cooldown, plus this removes your own debuffs, and this is extremely good when going up against other light monsters. Going back to Lath really quickly, the problem with him was that his 60 damage skill and his 80 damage skill, both of them are light based skills, whereas his special base skill, that's only a 50 damage skill. Lao Lao has a 75 damage special base skill. So that's really all I had to say about her. It's up to you whether you want to get Lath or if you want to get her. I personally haven't had too much experience using Lao Lao because I wasn't able to get her, but I have used Lath and I really do like him, and I would probably recommend you to go for him, but honestly you can't go wrong with either of these 2 monsters. And with that being said, we can finally move on to metal monsters. And we start things off with Metalhead. Really good stats all around to start things off. His trait is also really good. He's immune to stun, and although Metalhead is one of the original legendary monsters, he is still one of the top tier metal monsters. Having immune to stun is extremely good because so many metal monsters have stun skills, but he himself has an AoE stun. So I'm not sure if you saw his power, 3542, that is extremely high. You can use him as an attacker, you can give him all speed runes, use him as a main deny monster, you can pretty much do whatever you want with this monster. You can make yourself a little hybrid build. Considering Timerion exists and Timerion has cooldowns activated, you have this skill, Shouting for Vengeance. It has a 0 turn cooldown, it deals 50 damage, and it magnetizes the enemy monster. So even if you get hit with cooldowns activated, it'll at least have a skill you'll be able to do. With Paranoia, you'll be able to possess one enemy monster, and on top of that, they'll also have nightmares. Now currently, the only metal monster immune to possession is Stinger S1, and I guess of course Timerion because he's immune to everything, so a really good skill to have. Justice for All is an AoE burning skill, a really good DOT. Ace of Hearts is just a really high damage special base skill, so if you make him an attacker, you'd probably want to run this. In the Darkest Hour costs 27 stamina points, but look at that, you heal yourself by 20% stamina points, which is equivalent to 27 stamina. You heal your life by 20%, you give yourself a 20% shield, and you give yourself an extra turn, so if you happen to be possessed, you can pretty much wipe out that possession. Although Metalhead is one of the original monsters, he is still without a doubt one of the most amazing monsters, and without a doubt a monster you definitely want to get your hands on. And with that being said, we can move things along to Mechamancer. So first things first, his speed is 3454. This is the 3rd highest speed stat for metal monsters. He's not the 3rd fastest monster. The stat alone, that's just the 3rd highest. There's actually quite a few metal monsters, actually quite a few attackers that have the speed of 3465, so just keep that in mind. But one reason Mechamancer really stands out above the rest is because of a skill like this, the Calm Before the Storm. It's an AoE possession skill, and as I already mentioned, the only metal monster currently immune to possession is Stinger S1, and of course Timerion. But if you run Mechamancer in Team Wars against metal monsters and they don't have a Stinger or a Timerion, you can pretty much guarantee you're gonna get yourself 3 coins. And if that's not enough, check out Devotion. may give double damage to target, may possess target. So not only are you possessing the enemy target, you're also going to give him double damage. This is the kind of skill you want to use on the enemy attacker, so that enemy attacker can pretty much wipe out its whole team, including itself. So Mechamancer is also a really good choice, but the number one meta monster in my opinion that I think everyone should have, another monster that regardless how many gems he costs, you should definitely get your hands on him, it has to be the one, the only Timerion. And if you're new to the game and you're looking at this monster, you're probably thinking, why is he so good? Why is he a must-have monster? Just look at that power, that is sad. There are plenty of epic monsters that have a higher power than him. Look at that speed, that is extremely slow, it's not even good. The great thing about Timerion is, for one, his trait, Artifact. Timerion is not alive, it's an artifact. Status effects are useless against it. This pretty much means you can't possess Timerion, you can't freeze Timerion, you can't stun Timerion, you can't burn Timerion, you can't poison Timerion, you can't land status effects against Timerion. Granted, there are a few glitches in the game, there are a few status effects that do land, but I'm assuming sooner or later the developers will get that fixed. Timerion, because of this trait and because of his skills, is without a doubt, in my opinion, the best monster in the whole entire game. And I will admit that's a pretty bold statement to make, because arguing what monster is the best monster is such a subjective thing to do, because there are different types of monsters. There's supportive monsters, attack monsters, deny monsters. There are so many different categories that lots of people will say you can't compare apples to oranges, you can't compare this and that. But I will always maintain that deny monsters are an absolute must in Monster Legends. Deny monsters are way better than attack 100% of the time, and because of that, Timerion is without a doubt the best deny monster. Now, by no means am I saying he's unbeatable, there are so many ways to counter him, but he's also just so good. Let's take a look at his skill set. Timerion is probably most well known for cooldowns activated. Activates all cooldowns on enemy skills. If you don't know what that means, when Timerion does this skill, let's say he did it against another Timerion, what essentially happens is that this 4-turn cooldown takes effect. So if my Timerion does cooldowns activated against the enemy Timerion for 4 turns, that enemy Timerion won't be able to do cooldowns activated. And considering a lot of monsters tend to have cooldowns on their skills, when you use a skill like this, it pretty much immobilizes them. And this is extremely important, because who cares if that monster is immune to stun, immune to freeze, immune to possession, immune to whatever. You're affecting the monster's cooldown. This isn't some sort of negative status effect. Now, of course, you do got to be extremely careful, because if the enemy has a Barbatos, they'll still be able to do Master of Pain, or if the enemy has any monster that has a 0-turn cooldown, they're still going to be able to attack you. Loop damage is another really amazing skill. All the skills except the physical ones directed to Timerion's team will be reflected on the enemy. So with loop damage, you still take damage from whatever skill the enemy uses against you, but you reflect that same skill. So for example, if the enemy has a General Thetis and they do Stamina Devour on you, you do Stamina Devour on them. If the enemy has a Cabin Fish and it does AoE stun, the AoE stun is still going to hit you and immobilize some of your monsters, but you're going to reflect that back at them and you're going to AoE stun whatever monsters can be stunned. Stop time is just a phenomenal immobilizing skill. Target can't attack next turn, Timerion gains 1 extra turn. So not only do you immobilize a monster, Timerion you get an extra turn, and with this extra turn you can either recharge, you can do cooldowns activated, you can do whatever you think is going to benefit your team more. When you play the game enough, you kind of start understanding which monsters have 0 cooldown, which monsters don't. So what I tend to do, I'll do stop time on the monster I think has a 0 cooldown turn, or the monster that has a really good ultimate that I don't want them using against me, and then after I stop time that monster, I do cooldowns activated and I'm pretty much good to go. Space time. For next turn, Timerion and its team will dodge all incoming damage, requires cooldown. So with space time, it's important to note that you only dodge the damage. So if the enemy does an AoE freeze, you're gonna dodge the damage from the AoE freeze, but your monsters will still get frozen. Or if the enemy does an AoE burning, your monsters won't take that initial damage, but they still will be burned. But still, this is a really great way to stay alive. Equalizer is another thing Timerion is well known for. Equalizer is a skill that is gonna make your life super easy. Use this against any boss in adventure map, and you can wipe out the boss in 1 hit. Cooldowns deactivated, all ally skills in cooldown become active, requires cooldown. This skill is kind of the opposite of cooldowns activated, but for your own team. So say you have a monster that did their AoE freeze and it has a 3-turn cooldown. If after that Timerion goes and you do cooldowns deactivated, that monster that used that AoE freeze with a 3-turn cooldown, that cooldown basically finishes and you're free to use that skill once again on the following turn. And even in skills group 1, Timerion has some pretty impressive skills. Time Machine, all enemies transform to their young state, requires cooldown, so this skill literally transforms all of the enemy monsters back a stage and they deal an overall 40% less damage. It's pretty darn cool. So of all the metal monsters, without a doubt, it is Timerion who's the must-have monster. Even if he costs 276 gems, I say that's still a really good price for a monster like this. And that's pretty much going to conclude my video of which monsters I think are worth buying. For those of you that made it to the very end, I'm going to go ahead and go through every element and give you guys my number 1 choice. If I had to pick just one monster to get, this is a monster I would get. For fire monsters, it would be Shalinar. Nature monsters, it would be Serra. Earth monsters, it would be Oros. Thunder monsters, it would be Voltic. Water monsters, it would be Frostbite. Dark monsters, it would be Krampus. Magic monsters, overall, it would have to be Galante because of the fact that he can be used in special breedings and to breed Laumul Moo, and Ledovec, but in terms of general usability, for magic monsters it would be Egg Eater, for light monsters it would be Demise, and for metal monsters it would be Timerion. I want to thank everyone who made it to the very end of the video. I know it was extremely long. I know there was a part 1 and a part 2. I hope you enjoyed both of the parts. I hope both of these videos can help you guys figure out which monsters you should purchase whenever Social Point gives us a sale on Monster Legends. And to restate the points I made in part 1, I really recommend waiting for monsters to cost 225 gems. If you can be patient, it's really going to help you out in the long run because you're going to save so many gems, which will allow you to buy more monsters. That being said, there are some pretty darn good monsters that even if you were to spend 276 gems for, that's not such a bad deal. My second point, please just buy the monster you want. Don't worry if a monster is good or not so good. You don't have to ask for my approval. You don't have to say, Armor, is this monster worth buying? If you want the monster, just go ahead and buy it. My third point is that you should really get yourself a monster you need, specifically a monster that will help you finish the adventure map, a monster that will help you and your team for Team Wars. If you're missing a certain element, occupy that element that you're missing. And I'm gonna say this one last time because I feel that I'm gonna get so many comments on this. If I didn't mention a monster, that doesn't mean that monster isn't good. That doesn't mean that monster isn't worth it. I just really tried my best to go through all the legendary monsters and just pick the ones that really stand out. The monsters that are really worth it in my opinion. We all have very different opinions, so by no means am I 100% right. So at the end of the day, it ultimately comes up to you. Just buy the monster you want to buy. And with that being said, I want to leave everyone with the question. If you were only allowed to purchase one monster from each individual element, which monsters would you buy? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really eager to see which monsters really stand out and which monsters people really love. And like always, I hope everyone has a great amazing day or a great amazing night. Remember to dream big and pursue your passions.